Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world that celebrates planning. From an early age, we're taught to map out our future, make a 5-year plan, build your brand, chase your dream. We fill up notebooks, set reminders, and push ourselves to reach our version of success. And don't get me wrong, there's value in preparation, in having a vision. But there's something that life, and more importantly, God, keeps showing us. No matter how detailed your plan is, it's never above God's purpose. I've learned that you can spend years building something with passion, precision, and purpose, only to watch it fall apart in a moment. And in that moment, it's easy to feel confused or even betrayed. You start asking, why would God let this happen? But the truth is, the very thing you thought was falling apart might actually be falling into place. Not your place, but His. We build our plans on what we see. But God's purpose is built on what we can't see, what's ahead, what's beneath the surface, what's eternal. When you look at your life from a limited point of view, it's natural to want control. We're wired to hold on tightly to the things we dream about. We want them to succeed. We want them to work. But what happens when God interrupts that plan? What happens when the door slams shut, the opportunity dissolves, or the relationship you were so sure about ends? That's where faith begins. You see, God doesn't destroy your plans because He wants to hurt you. He does it because His love for you is too deep to let you settle for less than what He created you for. He breaks down the scaffolding of your own ideas, not out of punishment, but out of mercy. Because sometimes, if He doesn't remove your plan, you'll miss His purpose. And trust me, His purpose will always take you farther than your plan ever could. There was a time when I built something from the ground up, something I thought was mine to lead, mine to control. I poured my energy into it. I watched it grow. I had a vision, a roadmap, even the right team. But then everything shifted. The control I thought I had, gone. The certainty I carried, gone. I stood there thinking, this wasn't supposed to happen. But that's the thing. What we think is supposed to happen often has nothing to do with what God knows needs to happen. And in those quiet moments of frustration and disappointment, God speaks, not always in the way we expect, but He does. He reminds us that His ways are not our ways. His timing is not our timing, and His thoughts are far beyond ours. That verse in Proverbs 19:21, many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. That's not just a nice scripture to quote. It's a reality we come to live through. Think about it. How many times have you been saved from something you thought you wanted? How many no's turned out to be blessings in disguise? How many closed doors ended up protecting you from walking into rooms that would have damaged you? We rarely realize it in the moment, but often the very destruction of our plans is God's invitation into something deeper, something eternal. He's not just trying to redirect your career, your relationship, your project. He's trying to redirect your heart. Because when your heart is aligned with His will, everything else will follow. Not without challenges, not without sacrifice, but with peace. You might have planned to build an empire, and God might be calling you to build people. You might have wanted a platform, and God may be leading you into a season of humility. You might have been chasing applause while He's calling you into silence, into a secret place where character is formed. Because His purpose isn't about making you known, it's about making you whole. So yes, God will destroy your plans, and you might cry. You might grieve what could have been, but one day you'll look back and thank Him for every door He shut, for every opportunity He blocked, for every moment He pulled you away from your agenda and brought you back to His. And here's what I've found. Once you stop obsessing over what you are building and start listening to what He's building through you, everything changes. We don't usually see protection when we're staring at a wreck. When something we cared about gets torn apart, when a dream we built gets dismantled, it doesn't feel like love, it feels like loss. But over time, I've come to understand something I didn't see at first. Sometimes God protects you by ruining the very thing you were clinging to. Sometimes destruction is divine protection. I can remember a time when everything seemed to be going according to plan. The path looked clear, momentum was building, and I felt like I had finally stepped into the moment I'd worked for. Then out of nowhere, it all fell apart. Doors closed that had just opened. Conversations stopped that had once been full of promise. What I thought was the next step forward vanished. And in the middle of that collapse, I didn't feel grateful. I felt angry. I felt abandoned. I felt confused. But God wasn't punishing me. He was protecting me from something I couldn't see, from a future that looked good on paper, but would have drained something far more valuable, my purpose. The problem is, we assume that if something fails, we must have failed. We measure outcomes as proof of approval. If it's growing, we think God's in it. If it's falling apart, we think He's walked away. But it's never that simple. God's mercy doesn't always look like progress. It often looks like disruption. He doesn't just stop you from going down a wrong path. Sometimes He makes sure the whole road gets torn up, so you don't wander back to it. You know, you can pray for guidance and then get frustrated when the answer doesn't match your expectation. I've done that. You ask God to lead you, and when He does, the direction doesn't make sense. He pulls you out of something that felt right. He lets the opportunity dissolve. He removes the person, the team, the platform, and you're left thinking, why? But that's when you have to trust that what you call a loss might be the very thing that saves you. Not everything that looks good is good for you. Not every opportunity is your assignment, and not every open door is from God. I had to learn that the hard way. I chased things that glittered, thinking they were gold, only to realize later that they were distractions dressed up as destiny. God saw what I couldn't see. He knew what I didn't know, and He loved me too much to let me walk into a future that looked promising on the outside, but was poisonous on the inside. We don't talk enough about how sometimes God's protection hurts. Sometimes it means being stripped of something that made you feel valuable. It means sitting in silence while everything you built gets torn down. It means waking up every day wondering what you're supposed to do next, while everyone else seems to be moving forward. But that silence is sacred. That stillness is holy, because in those moments God is doing something deeper. He's not just removing danger. He's refining your trust. He's teaching you that safety isn't found in your plan working out. Safety is found in Him. And that's the shift, when your identity isn't wrapped up in what you've built, but in who He is. When you can say, even if this crumbles, I'm still grounded. That kind of trust doesn't happen when everything's going your way. It happens when everything falls apart and you're still standing, not because of your plan, but because of His presence. I've seen it again and again. What felt like betrayal was really protection. That business deal I thought I lost. It would have taken me down a path that consumed my time but robbed my peace. That partnership that fell apart, it was built on ambition, not alignment. That role I didn't get, it would have trapped me in a version of success that looked impressive but left me empty. God's no wasn't rejection. It was redirection. We think we know what we want. We think we know what's best, but God knows what we need. And sometimes the most loving thing He can do is tear it all down. Not to harm you, not to humiliate you, but to shield you from a storm you didn't see coming. You don't always need to understand it in the moment. You just need to trust that if God is allowing something to fall apart, it's because He's building something stronger in its place. Sometimes the closed door is the blessing. Sometimes the canceled plan is the rescue. Sometimes the setback is the shield. And when God breaks something apart, it's not always to stop you. It's to save you. We live in a world that teaches us to build everything around control. Control the outcome, control the timeline, control the brand, the image, the narrative. From business to personal life, everything seems to come down to how well you can strategize and execute. And let's be honest, it works to a point. Strategy can get you pretty far. You can build companies with it. You can build momentum, respect, success. But there's a limit, because at some point, life introduces a variable that no strategy can solve: surrender. I used to believe that if you were smart enough, careful enough, driven enough, you could shape your life the way you imagined it. And in a lot of ways, that belief fueled my decisions. It felt good to be the one steering the ship, setting the pace. But eventually, I ran into moments where all the intelligence, vision, and planning in the world couldn't fix what was falling apart. And in those moments, I learned something that changed me. Strategy might build something impressive, but surrender builds something eternal. There's something deeply uncomfortable about letting go. It almost feels like giving up, but it's not. Surrender isn't passivity. It's not laziness. It's not an excuse to avoid responsibility. Surrender is an act of trust. It's the decision to say, I have plans, but I'm not God. I can prepare, but I can't predict. It's about recognizing that even your best idea might not be the right one, and even your strongest desire might not be aligned with what's truly good for you. I had to come face to face with this when everything I thought I controlled started to slip through my fingers, and the more I tried to tighten my grip, the more it unraveled. Have you ever been there? Where the very thing you tried to keep together begins to fall apart the moment you start forcing it. That tension, that frustration. It's not failure. It's a sign. A signal that maybe, just maybe, you're not supposed to fix it. Maybe you're supposed to let go. You can plan for outcomes, but you can't command them. You can dream big, and you should, but if you're not willing to place those dreams in God's hands, they can turn into idols, beautiful, impressive, but empty. What surrender does is take the weight off your shoulders and places it in the hands of someone who sees more, knows more, and loves deeper than you ever could. And here's the paradox. When you surrender, you don't lose control. You gain peace. You stop obsessing over every move, every outcome, every potential risk, and you start walking with confidence, even when you don't have all the answers. Because now your confidence doesn't come from your plan, it comes from His presence. I used to think that the bigger the plan, the more I needed to strategize every detail. But I've seen what happens when you surrender even the biggest vision to God. Doors open that you didn't knock on. Opportunities show up that you didn't orchestrate. Timing aligns in ways you couldn't manufacture. And sometimes nothing changes externally, but your heart gets realigned. And suddenly what you were building shifts, because it's no longer about proving something or achieving something. It's about obeying something, following something, trusting someone, and that's where real transformation happens. Because now you're not asking, how do I make this succeed? You're asking, God, is this where you want me? You're not leading with strategy, you're leading with surrender, and surrender makes space for clarity, for wisdom, for peace. The kind of peace that doesn't come from progress or results, but from knowing that you're exactly where you're supposed to be, doing what you were made to do. I've sat in rooms full of brilliant minds, watched deals fall apart, seen talent wasted and momentum vanish, all because people refused to surrender what they were building. They couldn't release control, couldn't stop forcing it. But I've also seen quiet obedience create legacies. I've seen people walk away from what looked like success to the world, only to step into something so much deeper, so much more meaningful, because they chose surrender over strategy. So I'll say this, you can strategize all you want. You can draft the perfect plan, rehearse every move, prepare for every outcome. But if God isn't in it, no amount of planning will hold it together. And if God is in it, surrendering control won't weaken it, it'll strengthen it. Surrender is where faith becomes real. It's where striving ends and trust begins. It's not the absence of motion. It's the redirection of motive. And in the end, the most powerful thing you can say isn't, I have a plan. It's, I'm willing to follow. One of the hardest things to accept in life is when something you've prayed for, hoped for, worked for doesn't happen. And maybe what makes it worse is that it wasn't even a selfish thing. It was good, it made sense, you were ready, you were willing, and yet nothing, or worse, a clear no. And in that silence, or in that rejection, it's easy to start thinking that God's forgotten you. Or worse, that He's ignored you. But I want to tell you something that's taken me years to understand fully. Just because God delays something, or even denies it, doesn't mean He's rejecting you. In fact, more often than not, it's proof that He's shaping something deeper in you. When we think of God moving in our lives, we usually imagine action, breakthroughs, open doors, progress. But what about when He doesn't move? What about when it feels like the doors are locked, the timeline is off, and all your prayers are echoing into silence? That's when doubt creeps in. That's when frustration starts to feel louder than faith. I remember sitting in seasons like that, when everything I had hoped would happen just didn't, when the timelines I had built fell apart, when the opportunities I thought were guaranteed evaporated. And in those moments I didn't feel blessed or protected. I felt forgotten, like I had been passed over. But looking back now, with more clarity and scars that have turned into wisdom, I realized those moments weren't evidence that God had turned away from me. They were evidence that He was doing something in me. Because if He had given me what I wanted when I wanted it, I wouldn't have been ready for it. And more importantly, it wouldn't have built what He wanted to see in me: trust, depth, surrender. We say we trust God, but do we still trust Him when nothing is going our way? Do we trust Him when He says not yet or no? Because trust isn't tested when life makes sense. Trust is tested in delay, in disappointment, in the moments when your heart is open and your hands are empty. You can convince yourself that delay is a sign of distance, that God must be far away if He's not showing up the way you expected. But it's often in the waiting that He's the closest, whispering instead of shouting, guiding instead of pushing, shaping your soul instead of your situation. And I get it. We're taught to chase results, to produce, to prove. So when nothing happens, it feels like failure. But in God's economy, silence isn't failure. Delay isn't defeat, it's training, it's pruning. It's preparation for what's ahead, something you may not even see yet. There was a time I was so sure of the next step in my life. Every signal pointed to it, the right people, the right resources, the right timing. Or so I thought. But at the very last second, it fell through, and it felt cruel, like the rug had been pulled out from under me. But what I couldn't see then was that the collapse of that moment was actually the clearing of space for something far more significant, something I would have never chosen, but now wouldn't trade for anything. If God would have said yes to my timeline, I would have settled for something smaller. If He had given me what I asked for, I would have missed what I was meant for. Because sometimes the delay is actually a detour to something greater. And sometimes the thing you think you lost is making room for what your soul actually needs. So don't confuse God's silence with His absence. Don't mistake a closed door for a closed heart. He sees the end from the beginning. He knows what you're walking into, and He knows what still needs to grow in you before you're ready for it. He's not just preparing the promise, He's preparing you, and that's where patience becomes more than a virtue. It becomes a form of worship. To wait and still believe, to be delayed and still trust, to hear not now, and still stay faithful. That's what separates those who know about God from those who truly walk with Him. So if you're in a season where everything feels stuck, where the prayers aren't answered, the doors aren't opening, the dreams seem stalled, don't assume it's rejection, don't assume it's the end. It might just be the beginning of something you never imagined. God's delay is not His denial. It's His way of making sure that when you arrive, you're not just ready, you're rooted. You know, we spend a lot of our lives trying to build something that lasts. Whether it's a business, a relationship, a career, or even a legacy, there's this internal drive to leave a mark. Something that says, I was here and it mattered. And that drive isn't wrong. In fact, it's deeply human. But what I've learned over time is that sometimes what you're building isn't really about what you're building at all. Sometimes God is far less interested in the product you're obsessed with, and far more interested in the person you're becoming through the process. There was a time in my life where every decision I made was focused on the outcome. Every plan, every meeting, every strategy aimed at a goal I had set, and if it worked, I called it good. If it failed, I called it wasted. That's how I used to measure things, simple math. Success equals forward movement. Failure equals retreat. But God doesn't do math the way we do. He's not counting wins and losses. He's watching who you become in the middle of the tension. He's not just interested in the launch or the finish line. He's invested in the transformation that happens between the lines. I learned that when the things I had built began to shake, when the identity I had poured into my work started to feel like a weight instead of a purpose. And here's what shook me. I realized that I had made the outcome my God. I had made the success my validation. But God was never trying to validate me through my results. He was trying to refine me through the process. And that refining doesn't always look like elevation. Sometimes it looks like being stripped down, like losing what you thought you needed, like walking through seasons where nothing seems to be working the way it should. But what's really happening in those seasons is that your character is being forged, your identity is being clarified, and your purpose is being purified. See, we want a blueprint that guarantees success. But God is building something deeper than success. He's building strength. He's building endurance. He's building humility, because you can impress the world with your talent, but only character can carry the weight of true purpose. And purpose isn't always loud. It doesn't always come with applause or headlines or spotlight moments. Sometimes purpose is showing up when no one's watching. Sometimes it's forgiving someone when you could have walked away. Sometimes it's choosing integrity when compromise would have been easier. Sometimes it's keeping your heart soft when life gives you every reason to turn bitter. That's the kind of growth that doesn't make it onto a resume, but it builds a life worth living. That's the kind of maturity that can't be rushed. It has to be lived, and that's why God isn't always in a hurry to give you the platform you're praying for, because He cares more about who you are on the inside than how you appear on the outside. I've had seasons where the spotlight was on me, and I thought I was ready for it, until I realized my foundation wasn't strong enough to carry it. And I've had seasons where I felt buried in obscurity, only to look back and see that God wasn't burying me. He was planting me, giving me depth, rooting me for something I couldn't yet see. And you might be in that place right now. You might be in the middle of something that feels hidden, something that feels small, something that feels like it's not going anywhere. But don't underestimate what God is building beneath the surface. You don't need to be in the spotlight to be in His will. You don't need to be recognized to be refined. You just need to keep showing up with honesty, with surrender, and with a heart that says, God, do what you need to do in me, even if it takes longer than I hoped, because eventually the things that were forged in the quiet will be revealed in the open. The integrity you practiced in private will become the strength people see in public. The lessons you learned through loss will become the wisdom that leads others. And the person you became in the process will be far more valuable than anything you could have built without it. There comes a moment, sometimes more than once, when you look around at everything you've built, your plans, your goals, your schedule, your vision, and realize it's no longer about what you're chasing, it's about who you're following. Because if you've lived long enough, you've probably discovered this. You can have everything lined up perfectly and still feel lost. You can hit every milestone and still feel off course. That's the moment you realize that God isn't just interested in the destination. He wants to lead the journey. For a long time, I thought I knew what success looked like. I thought if I just worked harder, got smarter, stayed focused, I could carve out the life I wanted. And for a while, that strategy seemed to work. The progress felt good. The results came in. But somewhere along the way, a quiet question began to grow louder. Are you building this with me, or just asking me to bless what you've already decided to do? That question wrecked me. Because if I'm honest, most of the time, I wasn't really asking for direction. I was asking for approval. I had my blueprint. I had my plan. I just wanted a divine stamp that said, go for it. But that's not how surrender works. That's not how trust is built. You don't get peace from pushing your own way forward. You get peace from walking in step with the one who knows the way, even when you don't. It's easy to trust God when the road is clear and the outcomes make sense. It's a lot harder when He asks you to step into the unknown, or worse, walk away from something that looks like it's working. But that's the real test. Can you follow even when you don't understand? Can you obey even when it costs you your pride, your plan, your comfort? There was a moment when I had to let go of something I deeply wanted, something I had invested years of my life into, not because it was bad, but because God made it clear it wasn't mine to carry any more. I wrestled with that, fought it even. I asked why, over and over, and the answer didn't come in a clear explanation. It came in quiet peace, a peace that said, you're not being punished, you're being redirected. And I think some of you might need to hear that today. You're not being punished because something fell apart. You're not being overlooked because a door closed. You're being redirected. God loves you too much to let you succeed in something that would ultimately keep you from what he created you for. Following him doesn't always mean understanding the next step. Sometimes it means moving forward without clarity, trusting that he sees what you can't. It means trading your map for his presence. And if I've learned anything, it's this: the safest place to be isn't the place where everything is going right. It's the place where you know God is leading, even if the path looks nothing like you imagined. And let me tell you, when you follow him, really follow him, you start to see things differently. Your definition of success shifts. Your measure of progress changes. You stop asking, "Am I winning?" and start asking, "Am I walking where he wants me?" You stop obsessing over outcomes and start focusing on obedience, because in the end, results are temporary. Obedience shapes eternity. I've sat in rooms filled with brilliant people chasing all the right things: profit, legacy, recognition, but still aching with a quiet emptiness. And I've seen others who seem to have lost everything the world says matters, but they walk with a kind of peace that can't be explained. The difference: one group is chasing their plan, the other is following God's path. And the truth is, God doesn't just want to change your circumstances. He wants to change you. That's why he doesn't always give you what you ask for. That's why he lets certain plans fall apart. Because he's not just trying to bless what you're building. He's trying to build something in you that can't be shaken. So maybe your plans didn't work out the way you hoped. Maybe the door you were sure would open never did. Maybe the thing you thought would bring fulfillment left you more empty than ever. Don't let that make you bitter. Let it make you better. Let it remind you that you were never meant to lead your life alone. You were meant to follow.